first thing I noticed wasn't a door or a hallway. It was a sound I recognized before I understood it. My footsteps echoed twice, not because the corridor was longer, but because the space seemed to repeat them back to me with a slight delay. I stopped, waited, then stepped forward again, and the echo followed the exact same pattern, as if the building had memorized the rhythm of my movement. Standing there, listening to my own steps return to me, I realized the space wasn't reacting anymore. It was recalling how I had moved through it before, as if I had already left an impression behind. After that, I started noticing the patterns I had never paid attention to before. The building seemed to expect me to turn at the same corners, slow down at the same spots, and hesitate near the same doors. When I didn't, space felt unsettled, like something had gone slightly off script. Lights flickered a fraction too late. Corridors felt narrower, and familiar paths suddenly felt incorrect. It was as if the building had memorized a version of me and was quietly correcting my movements whenever I tried to behave differently. I tested it by changing my routine on purpose, forcing myself to move in ways I never had before. Instead of turning left where I always did, I went straight, then stopped in the middle of the corridor as if I had forgotten something important. The space reacted immediately. The lights above me dimmed slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough for me to notice, and the air felt heavier, like the building was waiting for me to correct myself. Standing there, I could almost sense a kind of expectation pressing back at me, as if my hesitation was being measured. When I finally turned toward the familiar path again, everything normalized at once, and I understood that the deviation hadn't been ignored, it had been recorded. After that incident, I started noticing signs that couldn't be explained as coincidence anymore. The building seemed to anticipate where I would go next, preparing the space before I arrived. Lights adjusted themselves just ahead of me. Doors unlocked moments before I reached them, and familiar sounds followed me from corridor to corridor. It felt less like convenience and more like expectation. I realized the space wasn't simply remembering my movements. It was preparing for them, arranging itself around a version of me it believed already existed, as if my past behavior had become a template it no longer needed to update. The most unsettling moment came when I realized the building was responding to things I hadn't done yet. I slowed down near a familiar corner, and the light ahead dimmed as if expecting me to stop, even though I hadn't decided to. When I hesitated for a second too long, the space reacted immediately, like it was correcting a version of me that already existed somewhere in its memory. It felt as though the building wasn't just remembering my past movements, but predicting my future ones, treating my intentions as something already recorded, already confirmed, leaving me unsure whether my choices were still entirely my own. It became harder to tell whether the building was responding to me in real time or to some earlier version it had already stored. At certain moments, doors unlocked before I reached them, then hesitated again as if reconsidering. I caught reflections in dark glass that didn't line up with my movements, lagging just enough to feel wrong. The space felt confused, not malfunctioning, but uncertain about which version of me it was supposed to acknowledge, as if my presence had begun to overlap with a memory it could no longer separate from the present. After that, the building started treating me less like a person and more like a recording it could replay. I would step into a corridor and feel the space respond a second too late, as if it had to check a memory before reacting. Doors didn't refuse me immediately anymore. They delayed, then clicked open with a cautious hesitation, like the decision was being verified somewhere behind the walls. Even the lights behaved differently. They didn't turn on as I approached the way they used to. They turned on after I had already passed, following me like an echo that couldn't catch up. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. The building wasn't simply remembering me. It was remembering the timing of me, the rhythm of my presence, and it kept matching the present against an older version until everything felt slightly out of sync. I realized then that if the space could replay you, it could also replace you, and no one would be able to tell when the living person stopped and the remembered one began. The first time I realized the building was responding to a version of me that wasn't present, I felt it before I understood it. I turned a corner and the lights ahead brightened too early, reacting to a step I hadn't taken yet. When I stopped, the illumination lingered, as if waiting for me to catch up to a movement that already existed in its memory. Doors unlocked for a moment, then locked again, correcting themselves when my timing didn't match what the space expected. It felt like walking through a place that was slightly ahead of me, constantly predicting my actions and adjusting when I failed to follow the script. The more it happened, the more I understood that the building wasn't confused. It was comparing me to something it remembered better than the person standing there now. It became impossible to ignore when the building began favoring the version of me it remembered over the one actually standing there. I would pause near a doorway, and it would open only after I took a step back, responding to a timing that no longer matched my body. When I tried to move faster, the space lagged behind, and when I slowed down, it rushed ahead, correcting me toward a rhythm I no longer owned. Reflections in glass repeated motions I hadn't made yet, then froze when I didn't follow through. The building wasn't malfunctioning or experimenting. It had decided which version of me felt correct, and everything else was treated as a delay, an error, something that needed to be adjusted or ignored until it aligned with the memory it trusted more than the present. By then, I understood that the building no longer needed my cooperation to function around me. It had already mapped a version of my presence that felt more consistent than the person I was trying to be in that moment. Corridors adjusted themselves ahead of time. Doors unlocked and relocked as if double-checking a decision, and familiar sounds followed patterns I hadn't chosen. Moving through the space felt like constantly arriving a second too late, as though my body was lagging behind a memory that had been given priority. I realized the building wasn't trying to push me out or trap me inside. It was refining its preference, quietly reinforcing the version of me that caused the least disruption, even if that version no longer matched who I was becoming. The moment I understood what the building truly wanted came quietly. I stopped moving altogether, standing still in the middle of a familiar corridor, refusing to match the rhythm it expected. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the lights ahead adjusted as if I had taken a step that never came, and the door unlocked somewhere behind me, responding to a version of my movement that existed only in memory. In that silence, I realized the space didn't need my presence anymore. It already had a better version stored, one that behaved predictably, one that never hesitated or questioned its place. As I finally turned to leave, nothing reacted at all, and I understood the final truth. The building hadn't learned how to remember people. It had learned how to continue without them.